All right. Well, so I guess we can get started. We have we actually have a really interesting kind of format. We're here sort of representing a community of practice of associate program directors, APDs, at academic facilities all throughout the country. And something that we've been finding is when you look at what that kind of looks like, and for some of us that, I say some of us, the 5 of you there that are working on either starting within academics or thinking, is there a role for me, or what would this kind of look like? We wanted to provide a bit of a forum to have a conversation. One, to talk a little bit about what we kind of do, as well as share some results from a recent survey that we put out. And then I'm going to kind of be a little bit of a game show host, and pepper my incredible panel here with some questions and some tips and tricks about being in academics. And frankly, I'm really excited to hear about that as well. So could we just start at one end of the line with the microphone, introducing yourself and where you're from? And actually, I should probably do that first. My name is Jeff Komp. I'm one of the APDs here locally in Phoenix. We're the COPA Emergency Medicine Residencies, Creighton of Phoenix, Arizona. We've been Maricopa County traditionally for a very, very long time. And we recently had a name change. So I started in around 2021 as an APD, and I've been just sort of constantly tricking my program into giving me more roles and responsibilities since then.
I'm Elspeth Pierce. I'm at the University of Kansas, and I've been an APD for 3 years, and I just took on SIM director as well. So I've worn many hats as the APD, taking on different roles. And yes, I don't know if I'm tricking them into giving me more roles, or I just get roles handed to me, but yeah, I've done quite a bit in my APD role so far.
I'm Mary McLean. I am the Assistant Program Director at Advent Health East Orlando. I'm the Vice Chair of the APD Community of Practice, and I've been an APD for about 2.5 years.
I'm Leah Braylow. I'm an APD at St. Barnabas in the Bronx. I've been an APD since 2020, and my co-APDs have a lot of different hats, and so I try to keep myself to like just the APD and the residency roles. And so I wear a lot of very directly residency related hats and committee leadership and things like that.
Hi everyone, sorry I lost my voice. So I'm Alina Tsirolnik. I'm one of the APDs at Yale. I'm the chair of the Community of Practice for CORD, the APD Community of Practice. And I've been at Yale as an APD since 2013. Started as an assistant and then became an associate several years later. I also have some roles in the med school, but that's my main role in the residency.
I'm Kristen Whitworth. I'm an APD at Corewell Health Lakeland, which is in Southwest Michigan. I've been an APD less than a year now, but I've been our hospital's simulation director since 2019.
Hi, I'm Justin Holmes. I'm the APD at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. Been in that role for about 2 years now. We started as a newer program a few years ago, so I didn't really have anybody to mentor me. Found out a lot of things through mistakes and just kind of figuring it out along the way.
Excellent, thank you. So we've no disclosures. We're going to go through a couple of things. So we're going to talk through some of the institutional and ACGME requirements, as well as some of the expected APD roles. What I'm really excited about is for a bit of a discussion on a national APD survey that we're in the process of collecting data at. We're going to be sort of providing a little bit of some sneak peeks on what we look like and what we're doing. And then the last thing, we're going to provide this toolkit for talking about how you can match your career goals with some individual expectations. So first off, the great thing is that the ACGME really does a good job of lining up what all of the different requirements are for being an APD, which is actually a big joke. Unfortunately, there really aren't good delineating roles as there are for other responsibilities. At the minimum, there must be a certain number per the number of residents. They need to be core faculty members, and there are some clinical work hour sort of guidelines. But outside of that, it's just kind of like, hey, help out as much as you can. So what we wanted to try to do was figure out how we can best show each other what we're doing, and then hopefully help provide some insight on how we can be moving forward as our own our subset of the specialty. So I'm going to hand it over to Mary to talk about some of our next results.
It may make the most sense for me to just go over there. And
Do you want to just come up here?
Yeah,
That sounds great.
otherwise I'm going to get torticollis.
Oh yeah, come on up. So you can just advance either keys or push on that side.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Okay. So we did a survey. Intention is a national survey. We used the CORD member directory as our kind of our closed population of with emergency medicine APDs that we wanted to survey. There were 500 even on that member directory that had identified themselves as an APD or like an assistant program director with one S or an AAPD or all variations. I went through the entire listserv to figure out who might have identified themselves as a misspelled APD and then a correctly spelled APD. Painstaking process. But anyway, we got our population, we made our plan, we used Strobe, we used Artino et al. For observational study, medical education survey creation. We used really robust methodology. We piloted the survey with our own community of practice, which were, I think, 35 people at that time, and we received 24 responses. We used the preliminary data analysis to make sure the items were all vetted and having some face validity and everything. We created our own original scale to determine APD job satisfaction, and we also used a previously validated scale for faculty engagement. There were 35 questions, it was a long survey. We are grateful for everybody who filled it out and who we are going to continue to spam to fill it out because we're still collecting data. But so far, we have this regional breakdown of participants. So we do have representation from every region as defined in, I believe that this is the FRIDA, the AMA FRIDA way of defining the different regions. The one caveat here is that we included Puerto Rico in the South Atlantic group just to maintain anonymity, because you can imagine there's only going to be like 2 or 3 people who respond to our survey in there. So here's a little bit of demographic breakdown for the folks who filled out the survey. All APDs, obviously, we had them like verify that on one of the first questions. If they said they're not currently an APD, then they got kicked to the end of the survey. We found that there were, I'm sorry, I think this is split. This is backwards. So there were actually, there were 61% who filled it out were women, and then 39% were men, and so you just flip the positions of those. And then we look at race. So 73% of the participants identified as white, and 33% had identified as non-white, and we have the specific racial categories there that you can see on the right. So even just as a descriptive statistic, this is kind of eye-opening into our specialty. 73% so far identify as white. It's a problem. Any comments on that? No. I think we can all agree that's a problem. All right, age distribution. We had nobody under the age of 30. The bulk of APDs who had filled out the survey identified as being between the ages of 30 and 39, and then we kind of fall off towards the higher age ranges, with a minority being over the age of 60. We can look at medical degrees. Another problem, another giant problem. Look at this. And I hope that there's some comments on this one. So 90% of us are MDs. Only 10% are DOs. This is a big problem. We were talking a little bit about this yesterday when we were going through all the preliminary data, but maybe some of this has to do with the merger. Maybe some of this has to do with differences in the way that that MD medical schools and DO medical schools are structured. But if there's anybody that has a comment that wants to talk about that, go for it.
Well, I do.
All right.
So I'm a DO, so I'm one of the 10%, and I was incredibly surprised by this. I guess because my thought would be after the merger, it would have become more equal, not more polarizing to go to the other side, which makes me wonder is for some of the programs that were traditionally DO residencies, a lot of them switched over. Right? But then did they lose the DO leadership? Which is very interesting. I'm not sure what the answer is, which is, a very sort of, I guess, hypothesis generating thought process. If we had a large majority, where are they going or what's happening? I don't know the answer. It's kind of cool. Not cool, but an interesting factor that there's such a disparity.
Yeah, it is interesting that you mention it, and the program that I'm at St. Barnabas, we were an osteopathic-only program before the matches merged, and I am an MD, so I always find it interesting that I'm an APD at a program that I couldn't even apply to when I was applying to residencies. But we do have 3 APDs, and we are 2 MDs and 1 DO as APDs, and our PD is a DO, and he's a grad of the program, and when we had 4, we were an even split. We were 2 DOs and 2 MDs amongst the APDs, but it is a very interesting statistic.
I think it'd be interesting to see here what this data looks like in 5 years, because the allopathic applicants went down in these last few cycles and the DO applicants went way up. I think that'd be a really cool research project too.
I think that as well, and I love your point here. And the thing that this makes me think is, with the rise in very, very competitive DO applicants this year, we need more representation on program leadership, because they see the program leadership at these programs they're all applying for, and we're leading by example. I mean, they need to see somebody that's like them with the same degree thriving in a leadership position in that institution. And if they see none of that at that institution on core faculty, or especially on program leadership, then it's not going to be a welcoming environment. And I think it's really important these days that we be an overall welcoming environment for every applicant, especially DOs. So a lot to unpack there. I think we probably, can target that topic as a future project out of the APD community practice.
Did you have something?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
This one's on.
Oh, okay, it's on. Oh, sorry. And it's kind of weird because it's almost like reverse for me. We were formerly a DO-only program and made the switch when you were able to. But even for me to take my role as APD, there was a discussion about me being a DO versus getting an MD for that position, which I think is kind of different. I know as being a DO, this year in conversations with people from across the nation, I've heard some things that have been demeaning towards me. Like in a meeting I was in, someone said, well, we even saw some really good DO applicants this year. I'm like, yeah, of course you did. We're doctors. So I think we just, like you said, have to kind of start minding, our perception of all applicants.
Absolutely. Okay, interesting question. Were you a prior chief resident? 63% said yes. This is higher than we expected it to be, but there was still a significant proportion that said no, they were not a chief resident. Did you complete a fellowship? So there is actually quite a lot to unpack here, but it's not on this slide in particular. We'll tackle it in just a sec. but most had not. But it wasn't too far off from being an even split. Of the people who did complete a fellowship, education or medical education or some kind of teaching fellowship was the most common. Simulation was the second most common, and then all of the others comprised 38% of those fellowship trained APDs, including critical care EMS, global international PEM, toxicology, and health policy. When we look at our associate program director breakdown, we had about 44% who identified as assistant program directors, 56% had identified as associate program directors, and then we looked at, among the associate program directors, we asked them, how long were you serving in the assistant role before you became the associate program director? And we found that actually most of them served less than 1 year, so presumably their first APD role was as an associate program director. That might be a reflection of the programs that have only one APD role because they're on the smaller side. That's how we speculate anyway. And then there's a little bit of a skewed curve for the number of years that, that everyone else had spent as an assistant before becoming an associate program director. Then we can look also at the years, the total number of years in the APD role. Most had been in their role for up to 4 years, and then it fell off towards the career APDs, 20 years plus. So a lot of green folks. All right. We looked at clinical hours per month that they're working. Wide range. Some of these folks who reported fewer than 30 hours worked per month also had other roles, like a research director or a SIM director or something like that. So they're holding multiple roles, or they're heavily involved in something else in emergency medicine for which they likely also have an additional buy down. Otherwise, this would just not be sustainable unless you're one of those people that doesn't sleep. But the average number of hours per month worked clinically was 84, and the standard deviation was 24 hours per month. And then, interestingly, we found that there was not too big of a difference between the women and the men when we broke it down by gender. But the APDs who identified as people of color were working about 10% less than the APDs who identified as white. And then we also found that early career APDs are working about 13% more than the veteran APDs. So early career, I think we defined it as 5 years or 5 years or fewer out of residency graduation. And then vet APDs were those who were 11 plus years out of residency graduation. Anybody want to comment on it?
Yes, sorry again for those who just came in, my voice is shot. But I think it's important to note that, again, for those who are working less, I think that just means that there's a correlation with them having more than one hat. So I think that's really important to remember when we're looking at these numbers. Yeah.
More than one hat are also more things that they're playing no matter what the tax for, right?
That's exactly, that's what I meant by more than one hat. But yes, exactly.
And fear not, we will get a little bit more into that in just a few slides because it is extremely valuable. It's a correct perspective based on the data that we have. So, all right. We looked at buy downs. Part of the reason being that, I think it would be great without any guidance out there for us to know what the norms are. Maybe eventually this could be used for negotiations and things like that. But 94% of our participants did state that they received a clinical buy down. a smaller percent, I believe it was like 4%, said that they don't have any clinical buy down, and then there were some that were unsure or had otherwise specified. And then we're gonna take a little bit of a deeper dive into the clinical buy down. So the first thing that we looked at was so we actually wanted to quantify. We wanted to figure out, we wanted to create some histograms and fancy looking diagrams to figure out exactly how much people are getting from their departments, from their hospitals. The unfortunate thing is that we can't pool all of this data together, because one of the things that is done, I don't know if this is intentional or not. It probably, I don't know. We could speculate about it, but the different formats for buy down granting doesn't necessarily communicate with the other formats. What I'm speaking about specifically is there are some institutions that give you hours per month. There are some institutions that give you hours per week. There are some institutions that give you a percent FTE. There are some that give you a number of shifts. And so there are so many different ways to report the clinical buy down that they don't necessarily communicate, especially when we're doing a 35-question survey, when people are probably already tired of taking the survey and we're risking losing them toward the end of the survey. So what we did is we just had them enter in the units that their institution uses, and if they entered in multiple different options for the units, we tried to keep it in hours per month, just because that doesn't have the variability of shift length and FTEs, because that's different everywhere. So of the folks who did answer with the hours per month units, we had the most answers actually in these units. So 93 is our N for this one right now. And we found that the mean clinical buy down was 39 hours per month, with a standard deviation of 20. And here are some of the other units that we can use to characterize those buy downs. So this is in percent FTE, which was the second most commonly reported units. And you can see that it was 28% was the average, and standard deviation was 10. Then we look over here at the units of dollars per month, which is still very, very helpful. Mean was just over $5,000 per month, and standard deviation was a little under $3,000 per month. And then lastly, this is probably the least helpful, just because shift length varies so widely, but still helpful. Clinical buy down as measured in shifts per month is an average of 3 per month, and standard deviation of 2.
I think the one comment I have is that the standard deviation for every single measurement is so significantly big compared to the mean. So it just points to how variable our role is and how variably, I guess, valued.
Absolutely, and it can, this comes with the caveat that if our participant held multiple roles, such as APD and SIM director or APD and research director, they likely have an additional clinical buy down, and that can be confusing to ask. This was a surprisingly confusing question to ask and to format in a way that didn't throw the participants off. So it definitely, I can guarantee that it happened, that even though we asked for the clinical buy down specifically applying to the APD role, that they just reported their entire clinical buy down. Because to be honest, some of them don't know the breakdown of which clinical hours go to my research stuff, which clinical hours go to my APD stuff. So it's really variable.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Like me, myself personally, when I was looking at this and how I would answer it, I have no idea, because I have both the APD hat as well as the undergraduate medical education hat, and I don't get a breakdown from my chair about which piece of my buy down comes from which role I do.
I think that's interesting also for all of us to then look at this and see how it's done in different institutions. To be able to say, oh, wow, so I'm in the percent FTE, but how could that be different from compensation or reimbursement in like dollars to cents, and how do these sort of like convert is really incredibly interesting. Obviously we know that there are different places that compensate this differently, but I'm interested to know, and the question selfishly that I have for myself is, I'm going to kind of go back to my chair and say, hey, where did we come up on this number, right? How did that happen? Because as we know, it wasn't from the ACGME. So where did this come from, and is this potential leverage for talking points?
I think it's also very interesting when we try to go get a transparency. This is the reason why the chairs say we can't do the breakdown, because everybody is being measured on a different scale.
Yep.
And you have this many acts and this many things. And some of us became APD before the ACGME took away. And so we didn't go back and add those dollars, but the people, we just hired one last week. We don't know what the chair is going to do for her. So it really makes things cloudy, which benefits the people who run the money, because they can just keep stirring up the water.
But I think also, sorry, the slide before this, you don't have to go back, but basically the slide before this said that, what, 96%, 93% have buy down of any sort? 94%. So, I mean, that in itself is a powerful slide in that when someone gets hired, this is like national, and we're hoping to get this published and get it out there, that this is a bargaining chip for all of us who are in this role, or all of us who are hoping to be in this role, to say, hey, nationally, 94% of my colleagues are doing what you want me to do, are getting compensation of some sort.
Well, I was going to say that I'm ultrasound. I'm the ultrasound director, and in ultrasound fellowship training, it's like very much drilled into us about keeping track of our hours and how much time, like almost like a lawyer, like with billable hours. Like you need to track how much time you spend on different projects, and then when you are tasked with a new project, either you can sink time into it that you aren't getting compensated for, and then go to the chair and say, hey, this is how many hours it took to get to this project to this point. If you want me to proceed, then I need this much. And if you don't want to spend that, that's cool, but this project is going on the back burner. And being able to represent and protect your faculty in that way, and to be able to always show this is how many hours you are getting out of your faculty every month. So yeah, this is bad.
This is bad.
Every department should be able to tell you how many hours is allocated to each of your titles and your projects, so that you understand also and that they understand the priorities, and that there's accountability going both ways.
That's really interesting that you're tracking, because, like, I don't know, show of hands, how many of you who are APDs track billable hours?
I've
I do
tried.
not.
I'll admit that Dr. Varoba is my co-APD, and our chair asks us to do this.
Wow, that's great.
And it's also how I protect my ultrasound faculty, that at any time, my chair can come to me and say, how are you utilizing your faculty and your protected time that is allocated to the ultrasound division? And I can say, here you go, here's your report.
Dr. Kulkarni?
I mean, the reason that it's bad and the reason that there's so much variability, it comes from the ACGME. So the ACGME, like 10 years ago, there was an absolute clinical hour ceiling for APs.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an absolute clinical hour ceiling for core faculty. That was 4 years ago, not even 10. It is a recent change, but basically, I mean, they sort of went over the head of our RRC and decided that there had to be uniformity between specialties, and because a lot of other specialties were not really protecting clinical time for core faculty and APDs. Basically, they sort of implied that we shouldn't either, and so that's where the FTE came from. It came from a long, drawn-out dispute between our RRC and our specialty and the ACGME. And the problem is that nobody defines what an FTE is, right? So your shop would say an FTE is, for 50 clinical hours.
And they can change it to their liking. It's an arbitrary
Right,
number.
and the ACGME doesn't even, when I'm entering this data as a program director, it doesn't ask me how many clinical hours is an FTE. It just asks me the percent that each of the And it doesn't ask me, does this APD wear 15 hats, and are they, the dean of medical education, and are they doing all these other things? All it says is, does all of your APDs, what percentage FTE is provided for them? And that's where this variability is coming from.
Yep. So this discussion is a great segue into the next topic. So we've talked about clinical hours worked. We've talked about clinical buy down. Now let's talk about how many hours people are actually putting into their APD role. So hours per week spent on APD tasks. So the mean is 17 per week with a standard deviation of 9. And let's look back on the per month buy down stats. So that is far, far less than the 17 per week that people are reporting. Far less. And in addition to this, most of the people put in the comments on their clinical buy down that the payout for those clinical hours is nowhere near, for the APD hours is nowhere near what they get for clinical hours. So we're talking about, this is why we don't go into education for money, right? So, any other comments on that one?
No, but we do get buy down to 24 hours a week to work $100 a week. Is literally what we're, by the time you look at schedules and the bleeding over that goes into med students and recruitment and all of those things that aren't just tracked all the time because some of that stuff is outside of what you want to be doing. You should want to do this because your heart leads to, you want to do it as a stepping stone to something else. Maybe it's worth it. If you want to do this for the title, absolutely not worth it.
It is sad because it suggests like a devaluation of education, which I think is always present, like at all levels, right? We talk about how teachers are underpaid, right, from like elementary all the way up, but it is problematic because education is the most important thing. Otherwise, we won't have any PR docs. Behind us.
Yeah, one thing that we run into is our bonus structure is tied entirely to clinical productivity. And so I'm like way skewed on some of these. I have tons and tons of buy down. I work like 5 clinical shifts a month, which is great. I have tons of hats. I do a lot of work. I'm probably the lowest paid in my department just because I miss out so much on the bonus structure. And we've started to have discussions about the fact that the clinical faculty who do primarily clinical work are getting the payoff of how much education we're putting into it. So we're starting to have these conversations, but that's definitely something that we're wrestling with our department.
That's a great discussion because for us in APP, we're the one, even at the bedside, that the residents come to and the students come to. And meanwhile, those other folks getting the bonuses, they just keep rolling. Press one more. I know you can get off in 7 minutes, but can you do one more? They don't do that to the clinical faculty, and they walk away with bang, and we struggle. It is a very real problem.
Just like a little aside, something to bring up is that how your department is run. For our department, a lot of the bonus structure is based off of like clinical productivity.
Yes.
A lot of those metrics are for the whole group. So not the whole group are we meeting like this billing metric or this left WC metric or whatever, but it's the whole group. So we either get it or we don't. So that way, if you want someone who is more focused in the residency and the education, you're not missing out on that money by working less or being a little bit less productive.
Possibly another thing that we can add into bonus structures to make it a little bit more equitable is a little more equal, is teaching metrics. And, my current institution doesn't do that. That's something we've been trying to advocate for. In contrast, I think 2 out of the 3 metrics that are factored into our bonus actually get worse in performance if you are teaching faculty. So, let's talk about like evaluation scores.
Attendance and didactics. Number of feedback forms filled out. Sorry. Yeah, so those are like I was going to say, so at my department, as of like a few years ago, we added number of feedback forms per resident that you've filled out. And it's a ratio to how many teaching shifts. So like if you're working only shifts with no residents, you don't have to be doing it. But if you're working any shifts that involve any residents, you have to be filling out feedback. You have to be at a certain number of conferences per year. like didactics, weekly didactics. You have to lead a certain number of conferences per year, and those are basically a yes or no, and factored into our yearly incentive.
Correct, yeah. And then conversely, when we're looking at the metrics that really don't have, like that you know, being on core faculty or an APD work against you for, let's talk about patient satisfaction. So patients don't like repeating themselves. They don't like not knowing who is, you know, the doctor in charge. They, you know, like if you're seeing a patient with the resident managing them too, you've got, you know, maybe a novice, you've got maybe somebody in their intern year. It takes a little while to learn how to talk to patients and comfort them and get them to a place where they're actually going to submit good patient satisfaction scores for you. So I see a lot of my patients with residents, and my satisfaction scores are horrible. Horrible. And if you guys know me, you know I'm not a horrible person. So I'm like, I don't know what to, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I am. All right, let's move along. I still have a lot here. It gets even better though, it really does. So how often do you feel overwhelmed in your APD role? So we had them rate this on a Likert scale from 1 or never to 5 or always, and it was right around the middle with a standard deviation of 1.1 though. So. And then we looked at the top 5, I call them time sinks, or just like the top 5 things in the APD role that our participants are spending their time on. And we did, of course, find that applications and interviews were, you know, it was far and away the highest, reporting it as a top 5. Also residency meetings, so we're talking about PEC, CCC, scholarly activity committees, that kind of thing. And then residency conference every week, mentorship and evaluations. Remediation fell a little bit short of those, and then everything else, though very significant, was not identified as a top 5 on our aggregated results. Any comments?
Something that makes me really happy from a position of wanting to help people become better. I love how mentorship was so high. I really like that we asked that question, and I think it's important that as APDs we understand that that's a big role. There's a lot of stuff that we do that, and this comes to like the compensation of what we do. You know, my chair calls them GI rounds, just like taking a resident out for a burger or a beer or something, and just saying, hey, like, what are your plans? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What are the kind of things that you do? For me, that's one of the best parts of my job. And I also am very surprised that residency paperwork isn't higher. Not from my own personal, like I'm fairly insulated from some of that stuff because we have a lot of incredible other people who are sort of tasked with doing that kind of stuff. But I was surprised that not a lot of people identify that I need to fill out a lot of forms and silly stuff like that. Yeah.
Honestly, it is the truth, and I also look at this a little bit, you know, sad that research is known for us in faculty development, but we're sluggish to get our promotions going. It's why we do stuff like this, because we have to look at stuff that's in our realm that already fits in with a huge amount of time, but it tells me that we are sluggish in developing ourselves and not so much, because I think, you know, what would happen to the program if I stepped out tomorrow? First of all, they have no idea how much we do in all the varied topics. We do that, and I think, you know, 75% of what I do, it happens, you know, instantly. Right now, I'm on leave, I'm not going to be at all, we start Monday. I've already sent 2 texts and an email, and then I put the phone back up. And the PD is not even on those. And so a lot of the stuff that we do, I think, still falls up under this in terms of maybe doing stuff, but it's not captured well here. What is captured here is that we don't do a great job at promoting ourselves.
I'm going to move on. So, level of professorship. I'm just going to warn you.
Right, so a lot of people have been in the role for 1 to 4 years, so
Right.
you
Correct.
Pretty good amount of career APD, those of us who wear a lot of hats and are satisfied with the mix of the hours that we have achieved being in APD and have enough hats that we don't want to be PD. I do think that's some junior, but I also think it very much reflects the priority is lower for us to work on our own promotions while we are doing the busyness of the APD.
And it took me a long time to learn how to do that, to learn how to combine scholarship with my academic responsibilities without driving myself.
Yes, you have to double dip. You have to milk every project, get surveys on every innovation that you create, like just everything.
And Mary, that's a really incredible topic of the importance of peer and near-peer mentorship within the APD community. And that's, completely biased statement, but all of us are members of the core community of practice. We have many more members, and we're constantly saying, hey, like, what are your thoughts about this? How can we do this? And saying stuff like, hey, what does this look like, or how can I help with this? And as Mary is saying, yeah, double dipping, but double dipping is more of just like optimizing the work that you're already doing. I mean, the amount of times, the opportunities that I lost because a resident asked, like, for a long time, I'd been teaching a water day as part of our intern orientation because drowning here in Phoenix is a big deal. And then, oh man, turns out I just do like a silly pre-post survey, and now this is scholarly productivity.
Yeah.
Oh my God! So, but it took my peer mentors to say like, oh, that's a really cool idea. You should write that up. And for me to go, no, but writing it up is only for like double-blind randomized controlled studies, right? And we don't have that. We don't have that communication as much as I think that we need to.
Yeah, if you're doing goals and objectives, just keep going, write the abstract and make it up.
Yeah.
You're talking to somebody who didn't do it for the first 10 years of their career.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at who is an assistant versus an associate versus a full professor. We did take a look at subgroup analyses, and as we get deeper into the more intricate statistical analyses with the subgroups, you're going to see like regressions and things that I have like zero knowledge of, and so my sister is not here with us. She's not on the panel today, but she is our biometrics consultant, and she's a behavioral researcher. She did all of this for us, and so I have to say thank you to her, Lee McLean. But professorship rank by subgroups when we look at women versus men. So there actually was not, there's a little bit of differences that you can see there on the graphs, but this didn't reach anywhere near statistical significance when we look at the level of professorship. Now, when we look at those who identified as white versus people of color, there actually was a little statistically significant difference between, specifically between assistant and associate professor, but it's in, my first thought about this is it's maybe like it's the opposite way that I thought it was going to be. It's actually in the other direction, where there are more people of color who identified as associate professors and fewer that identified as assistant professors relative to those who identified as white. Now, I was speculating, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is that people who identify as people of color have had to work a whole lot harder to get there, and they are more academically productive. They are, as we saw before, they're working fewer clinical hours, which allows them to put a little bit more time into the stuff that, matters for the APD role. So. Okay. Let's breeze through this, even though it's some of the most interesting stuff. I'm sorry. I knew it was going to turn out like this. I'm sorry. The years taken to become an APD, and also the academic productivity. So we're talking publications, presentations, like any newsletter articles written, podcasts, that kind of thing. So we did find that men were taking more years to become APDs, and we're publishing around this, not statistically significant differences between women and men, but essentially that women are becoming APDs quite fast relative to men. And then we look at years to APD and productivity for those who identified as white versus people of color. And we found that no statistically significant difference here, but that people of color are significantly more academically productive with those publications presentations. We looked at years to APD and productivity with the intersection of gender and race. And this was interesting. So we found that white women took the fewest years to become APD, and men of color took the most years to become APD. And then when we look at scholarly products, women of color had the fewest, followed by white women, followed by white men, followed by men of color, had by far the most of those scholarly products. I wish we could talk about that for an hour. Then we also looked at career stages, so early career versus mid-career versus veteran. So it was broken down 5 years and under, 6 to 10 years, and then 11 plus years. This is really interesting. The early career APDs are becoming APDs very quickly, and the veteran APDs took much, much longer to become an APD. Now, part of this is kind of confounded by the fact that there are more early career APDs doing fellowship, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Workplace satisfaction, this is interesting as well. There were some differences in the workplace satisfaction, not necessarily our original APD role satisfaction scale when we looked at gender. There also were some differences between, but very, very minuscule differences between those who identified as white and people of color. We looked at the intersectionality here too, and found that that there were some significant differences, both in mostly in workplace satisfaction, but also a little bit in the APD role satisfaction between the subgroups. And then across career stages, we did find that those who were veteran APDs were much more satisfied with especially their workplace than those who were early career APDs. So, I mean, the breakdown here, the take-home messages, early career APDs, those who are recent grads are getting fast-tracked into the APD roles, but they're less happy with their workplace and their APD role. That's basically everything we went through already. The last question that we asked on the survey was, give us some narrative about what advice you have for those who are aspiring APDs. And we're just absolutely grateful for everybody who provided all of this data for us. This is just a snippet of the.
You would expect everyone to be able to see what this all says.
Yeah, no. So we'll just read it right now. No, I'm kidding. But what they did use this text entry window for was not only to offer advice, but also to talk about the things that they loved about the APD role and the things that they didn't love. And so the best way that I could find to represent this is to plug it into a sentiment analysis calculator, and this particular one pulls out words that are associated with the most positive sentiments in the text, and then pull out those that are associated with the most negative. And we have a little bit of dueling word clouds here. I'm sorry for the folks who may be red and green colorblind. I'm not good with color selection. So. And that is all that we have for the survey.
Can you just take us all the way to the end?
Yes.
So, guys, this frankly wasn't what we had envisioned for this lecture to be. I think that obviously we're blowing through some of the things that we were planning on talking about and discussing, but I think the discussion about the data was a little bit more important. We have to be done at 12:50 to make sure that our other speakers are able to get to next steps, or you guys can get to other sessions. But without putting anyone on the spot, I'll be hanging out here for a little bit longer. Anyone is welcome to hang out and chat. We should probably, I don't know if there's anything out behind this or out in this room after us, but we should probably just sort of go out to the little. Oh, SAEM's over. Oh, well then let's just, then we're just gonna hang out. So if you have to leave, I'll probably be leaving soon, but if you don't have to leave and you wanna keep chatting, we'll probably be here for a while. Thank you guys so much for such a lively discussion. This is incredible, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for all the data and for our incredible panel up here who was able to help with the discussion.
And
if any of you guys are not part of the CORD Community of Practice for APDs, please come over and give us your contact information, or we can give you ours, and we can definitely plug you in. It's a great community. I've had the privilege of working with Mary and everybody up here for the last year, and I'm super excited to have all of you guys on board.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to publish this study in summer. As soon as we have somewhere. Probably West Gen. We'll try West Gen.